I'm not sure about these wheels, Brad.
But I was told that they glide smoothly, that they are silent, that they are the best thing since sliced bread.
There's a little bit more startup inertia than I'd like.
Huh.
Like there's a little like while they rotate. Maybe the ones I got were too cheap. But my old wheels were pretty good. They just
your speed off the line, your 0 to 60 is suffering. Is that what you're saying?
Look, my straight line speed is real good. Okay, it's like it's.
Are you doing street races in your office chair? Like, what is the problem here?
I haven't put enough points into spin. Okay, I've been. I can't think about anything else. I played 8 hours of Tony Hawk yesterday. I can't think of anything but Tony Hawk.
Okay,
I didn't play 8 hours of Tony Hawk, but I did get it working on Moonlight, so I can play Epic Store games in my living room and my bedroom now.
That sounds all right.
Yeah. I like having brakes on the chair wheels. I've never had that before.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I bought rollerblade wheels with brakes.
With brakes?
Yeah, with brakes.
How do you trigger the brake? Is it on the?
There's a little lever you push. It's like a foot brake on a rolly cart. Yeah.
Wow. So you can lock your chair into place?
I can lock my chair into. I figured in case I got real into racing sims or maybe like get rudders for my HOTAS situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good to go.
So I mean, honest appraisal.
So there's no side to side wiggle once you roll into place, which is nice.
Yeah, because I'm doing it right now in this chair and it feels terrible.
Yeah, but when you push back, there's a little bit of a moment while the wheels flip back around to be aimed the right direction.
Okay, sure.
And it adds a little bit of drag that I'm not like. I was expecting this to be butter smooth all the way through.
Well, so actually, now that you mention it, like the normal caster on a traditional office chair it's actually two wheels, right? That it can turn independently.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
And it turns out the steel case wheels, when I was looking at reviews of these things, they're like, well, my steel case wheels, because when you buy a Gesture or a nice steel case chair, they say, what kind of floor do you have? You know, do you have a hardwood floor? Do you have carpet floor? And they give you the right casters. It's the casters were pretty nice. So it may just be that I had real good wheels already and didn't know it. And I replaced them with slightly less good, but maybe more functional.
What if one were still sitting on casters from, let's say, Office Max circa 2003?
Look, Brad, you need to just put the chair and the old monitors out on the curb with a note that says free to a good home and then walk away.
That was the plan, but I have a taker on those monitors.
What?
Somebody has signed up.
Is it a fan?
No, it's someone from work. I mentioned it in the newsletter that I wrote for the Giant Bomb newsletter. I wrote 3 weeks ago. I just happened to mention we're getting all this new gear from the budget stuff that we got a surplus and we need to gear up at home. So what am I going to do with these 15-year-old monitors? And someone slacked me. It's the weird thing about working at a giant company with a company-wide Slack account is like anybody in the company can get to you very quickly.
Was it Stephen Colbert?
It was not Stephen Colbert.
Are you sure?
I don't think Stephen Colbert is in that database. I might be wrong.
Was it LL Cool J?
I could pull it. I shouldn't do this. I could pull it up right now and tell you.
Was it the numbers lady? That's a Fox thing, right?
No, it was someone from another department who I had not met before. But I really shouldn't do this. I'm clicking on the direct message button right now. Steven, is it a PH or a V?
Look, it's impossible for me to know the answer to this question.
I have an answer. I don't know if I should say it.
Yeah, you can Slack Stephen Colbert.
There is an entry in here. I can't say.
You should ask him to come on the show. We could talk about the fall of America. It'd be great.
I highly doubt that those messages go straight to him, but
I bet it does. I bet you could make his phone ring right now.
Whoever's manning that account, it says they're online right now.
Look, Stephen Colbert is the most always online person in the world. He knows everything.
Ain't that the truth?
I love that guy. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad.
I'm glad we're able to carry forward the long tradition of finding out which famous CBS people you're able to access through your intra-office communication tools.
I don't know what it says about me, but I mean, like nothing against Stephen Colbert, but I get more excited looking up, say, 60 Minutes personalities.
Yeah, well, I mean, look.
Hardcore news types.
If
Jeff Glor is not online right now.
Would you do me a favor and let Julie Chen know that the current season of Big Brother is a real time capsule into our COVID lifestyle, and I'm quite enjoying it?
She's also in here.
Of course she is.
We have to stop talking about this.
Yeah, this is a bad idea.
I will never message any of these people, just for the record, for anyone in management listening right now.
This is a bit. This is very much a bit. What are we going to talk? Oh, first off, we have news.
Whoa.
Something magical's happened.
What happened?
This week we hit 1,000 backers of the TechPod Patreon. We don't usually talk about this at the beginning to annoy the people who don't, who aren't patrons, which is fine. We love you guys too.
Yeah, but there's housekeeping associated with this one.
We had a challenge.
Yes.
We issued a challenge that if we hit 1,000 backers of the TechPod Patreon, then we would, Brad, who has never read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I, who have read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy many, many times.
How many times would you estimate?
Oh, dude. It's
inestimable.
I read it first when I was 12 years old.
Uncountable.
And for a while, I was reading it like, every few years.
Okay. All right. I get it.
I've listened to the radio plays. I've watched the 80s TV show. I've watched the movie. I've listened to the abridged audio version, the radio dramas, not the radio plays, but the abridged audiobook versions, the dramatized ones. I've listened to the unabridged audiobook versions. I think that's all the main forms.
You've consumed every possible permutation. You know what would be a fun experiment, which I am not going to do, to be clear.
Yes.
But what if I were to consume one of those other versions? Like, what if I just watched the recent movie and then showed up ready to talk about the book?
Brad, don't do that. That would be... So I like the recent movie.
How well I could keep up with that discussion, I think, would be kind of a fascinating exercise. But I also fully acknowledge that I would be cheating myself by doing that.
Yeah, I think starting. I thought about this a lot. I think starting with the book is good. The radio plays are really good.
I fully intend to read the book.
The movie is one of those movies that, like, if you weren't familiar with the source material, is a pretty fucking good movie. But when you compare it against like the radio plays and even it's like Martin Freeman and Zooey Deschanel and Mos Def are great, but
that's
like
that's not a bad cast.
And what's his name from Moon?
Sam Rockwell.
Sam Rockwell, our greatest living actor.
Sam Rockwell is incredible.
Yeah, he's very good. It's like it is a well done thing, but it misses a little bit of what makes Hitchhikers special, because it's a little, it's imagine if they made an Americanized version of Shaun of the Dead.
Okay, sure,
right. That's kind of what you end up with.
Okay, enough said. Like, I'm good.
Yeah.
Something this hallowed and seminal I would never experience in any form other than the original.
So you found your omnibus. I have my digital version. We're going to start reading now. We're going to kind of shoot for maybe first episode of October is this. So this is your warning. This is not a patron exclusive anything. This is for everybody. The patrons have unlocked the achievement for all of us.
Yes.
We'll do it as the first episode of October.
What is that episode? Is it just a book club?
I don't know.
We'll figure it out.
We got a month. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
But this week, the business at hand is a little... trying to come up with a segue here, and I don't have it.
This is a dense episode. Dude, new graphics cards.
Yeah, new video cards.
New Nvidia that's the most wonderful time of the year.
We've been waiting a long time.
It's that magical moment in a young man's life.
We get invited into Jensen Wong's kitchen. Yes. We get to see where he bakes up the video cards.
So I'm glad you mentioned that. They acknowledged the spatulas. We got yes.
First up, disclosure, Nvidia paid me to talk over their stream earlier this week. So, they asked for honest, natural feedback, which is what I provide when people ask me to do that sort of thing.
Okay.
But I have to disclose that because, it's the law. So
I suddenly feel this like thin layer of film on top of me. I don't know where's this coming from.
Is it food? Is it like a residue from eating?
It's vaguely slimy. No, I'm just kidding. I am just joshing you.
Poor me.
To be clear, I was not part of that deal.
No, Brad was not part of that deal.
They did not pay me. But no,
Brad just did his,
But they did invite me along with you.
Yes.
Into, I don't know what they would typically call this, like kind of their deep dive on.
They call them Editor's Days is what they usually call them.
Okay. So I'm very familiar with that concept from the Games Press. The biggest differentiator here is how insanely technical this entire thing was.
Well, so these things started years and years ago. When I was at Maximum PC and reviewed video cards, I went to them pretty much every year for every new card. In the old days, we would get the new cards and then we would look at what they said the cards were capable of, and we'd do a bunch of math and run some weird benchmarks and try to figure out how the cards worked inside. And then eventually they were just like, just stop doing that. We're just going to tell you how stuff works.
Stop getting it wrong. We're just going to give you the information straight.
Well, yeah. And they give, I would describe like it's one of those things where like the people from Digital Foundries are there. The people who do like Guru 3D and all those guys are there. And it's like the people who the range of people who are there are from like people who have CS degrees in graphics rendering and stuff like that and have written SIGGRAPH papers all the way down to like me and you, Brad. And you get an incredible amount of detail. So we're going to take like 6 hours of briefings and we're going to distill that down into a 45-minute podcast that normal humans can understand.
How long was, hold up, let me check here.
We started at 8 o'clock and finished at
13. 2. We wrote 9 pages of notes off of those presentations, single spaced. But
that's
the very first slide of the first presentation was a spatula joke. I just wanted to say. Yeah. So they are somewhat self-aware about this stuff.
I went back and looked, and you could see the card there behind the spatulas the whole time.
Really?
Yeah. Also, the spatulas were in the original Ampere rollout too, when they did like the computational Ampere in the spring.
You know, it's like I got nothing but respect for a man who loves his spatulas.
My next time I go down there, I'm gonna cast a custom spatula and take it as a gift because
that's pretty good. We could use some more spatulas around here. Quite frankly, you can never have enough. I like to make eggs, but yeah, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit. I saved a handful of the slides from this thing.
Yeah,
the first one I like 5 minutes into it, they were talking about digging deep into like the ray tracing workload pipeline. And like, I've got slides here talking about bounding volume hierarchies and linear equations and,
well, so it's one of the things like when it's easy for them to say at a stand-up presentation, hey, our ray tracing cores are 2 times faster than they were in Turing, the 2000 series cards.
Yes. But this was super useful because like I got a much better sense of why they're that much faster. Yeah.
Like they sit down and explicitly say, look, to make the ray tracing cores faster, they figured out where the bottlenecks were from watching data on dozens of games that have come out and thousands and thousands of people using it to see where the bottlenecks are, and then they designed this new stuff to bypass those bottlenecks. So, for example, things like there are units that can do the math that calculates whether triangles or bounding box are intersected by rays. Like that is a hardware accelerated bit now. And all of these things can run concurrently. So previously they had to run sequentially and now they run concurrently. And that turns out it makes things faster.
Yeah, I think the kind of gist we got from that big hardware presentation, I think that one of us wrote in these notes somewhere, is that I think it was you that wrote that like this gave the impression that, the previous generation of cards was the first rollout for hardware based ray tracing at all. Yeah. Yeah. And this gives the impression that they looked at how they accomplished that and saw a bunch of very glaring bottlenecks that they could easily solve.
I mean, that's kind of the story of graphics in general over the last 20 years. But it's definitely that was the feeling I got.
This was very pronounced, because they were like diverting entire functions off to like kind of co-processing hardware or
like units in the cores. So
that's what I mean.
So the difference between Pascal, Turing, and Ampere. So Pascal is the 1000 series cards. Turing is the 2000 series cards. Ampere is the 3000 series cards. Is that like, for example, on a 1080, when you do ray tracing, if you force Minecraft to do ray tracing on a 1080, it can do it, but it runs all of the math on the shader processors. If you do it on the Ampere and the Turing cards, it uses the RT accelerators, which are sections of each of the cores on the GPU, and there are thousands of these things. Like there are literal buttloads, and so it's something like accelerating linear equations, which is something that hasn't necessarily needed to be accelerated in hardware on a GPU before, and now they can run a whole lot of those concurrently because they use those to do the bounding calculations, the collision calculations for whether the rays from light sources impact specific triangles.
Yeah.
So
this was really illuminating for a layman such as myself. I mean, I always knew this intuitively, but to actually see it all laid out, that like every single thing going on in the construction of a frame is just a math problem, you know? Like when you really break it down, like what is this hardware doing? It's just a bunch of and we've talked about this before.
An insane amount of specialized
it's
math.
Just a bunch of specialized hardware to solve very specific types of math problems. And, you know, you solve however many, millions of those per frame or something.
Well, I mean, they were talking about 8K gaming, which is like 33 million pixels a frame or something like that. It's bonkers. So let's talk about the cards. There are 3 cards that they announced: the 3070, the 3080, and the 3090. And I'm realizing now that I didn't write prices down for any of these, which is probably an error.
I've got it in the old noggin. Okay, 3070 is $499.
Okay, so $500 is the starting point.
Yes, 3080 is $699.
So $200 up.
Yes, and then the 3090 is $1499.
So $700 up.
It's more than
$800 up.
Yes, more than double the next step down. Like the 3090 is the new Titan. I think they more or less came out and said that.
Yeah,
I think
they
explicitly said this is the card for crazy. I shouldn't say crazy people. There are definitely legitimate applications for it, but it is like, you're not, by more than doubling the price of a 3080, you are not more than doubling the performance or anything close to that.
Well, it depends on what you're doing, because if you're doing stuff that's like math, like they rolled out the Titan last. I mean, they've always had the Titan for a fairly long time now, but they assumed up until this point it was for people with really specific workloads, like computational math people or AI people doing AI models on their workstations and stuff like that. And it turns out a lot of people bought Titans last year for more traditional workloads. And as the benefits of SLI have waned progressively more each generation, to the point that like nobody should fucking run SLI now unless you have a explicit need for it. The benefit of having a big chonker of a card so you can play games at 4K this generation or 8K on the next generation makes a little bit more sense.
Sure.
The thing that is telling about this generation is the first time in 10 years, maybe more than that I remember the low end card from the next generation being faster than the high end card from the previous generation.
So is that in fact the case? 3070.
So there are 2 big takeaways. If you don't care about any of this other stuff, the one is that they acknowledged that on the last generation they focused on bringing ray tracing and getting that working, but you didn't see traditional game performance boosts.
Yeah,
things got better looking, but they didn't run faster.
I was shocked at how candid Jensen Huang was in that presentation, the stream.
They're very they're pragmatic.
Fact. There was that line toward the end where he basically was just like, to all my Pascal friends out there, it's safe to upgrade now. Like, you're basically tacitly acknowledging that, like, hey, maybe the previous generation was not really worth it for people who just wanted higher frame rates.
Well, it's kind of the thing we said, like, hey, this one is great if you want ray tracing, but the benchmark improvements over previous generation cards were a little underwhelming on the 2080 series. Yes. Anyway,
this is the, I mean, I don't know if you can quite apply the old TikTok model to this thing, but last time was a feature upgrade. This is a performance upgrade.
Well, so these would both be ticks. So the supers would be the talk. On the TikTok model.
Okay. So metaphor. maybe that analogy doesn't fit exactly, but like what the point is, like, I mean, there are new features to this, but in terms of the basic graphical capabilities, it's kind of doing the same stuff faster.
They're kind of I mean, yes, it is definitely here's what we learned from the first go on this, and let's make it better this go around.
Yeah, and again, seeing how all the pipeline has been optimized and new acceleration added and X, Y, and Z, really, it just gave a lot of good background to why the performance increase is so profound here.
Exactly.
It made it very clear, like, hey, this is not smoke and mirrors. This is exactly why these are so much faster. They're doing all these math operations in an incredibly more efficient and like more parallel way.
Well, and they're also starting to think about other places in the GPU, in the game pipeline, that the GPU can help speed pain points and remove bottlenecks.
Yeah.
Which, like I said, graphics is all about removing. It's all like a video card in the basic sense is just about removing a bottleneck that the CPU is bad at and moving it onto a dedicated coprocessor. Anyway, okay, so 3070 is 1.7. These are all about 1.7 gigahertz. There's tiny clock speed differences. I'm not going to get into that. The 3070 has 8 gigs of GDDR6 RAM and 5888 CUDA cores. So CUDA cores includes all of the like specialized like math cores. So that I believe is going to include RT, Tensor, and shader cores.
Tensor cores are the AI accelerators. Is that right?
Tensor cores are machine learning accelerators. So they're basically mimicking like neural nets. So you're training a matrix of possible outcomes, and the ones that are weighted heavily get used, and the ones that are weighted lightly get culled, and then you move on to the next thing.
Well, that's right. They mentioned they have acceleration or optimization for that process too now. Or better.
So the optimization for that, I'm hazy on how all the machine learning stuff works, because it's. I mean, it's kind of just statistics, but it seems like there's more to it than that, because it gets really complicated really fast.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff seems like more than anything like the domain of pure academia to me. Or like that is
kind of, but it's showing up in games and like.
Well, no, it is now, but what I mean is
using it everywhere.
It's like a very obvious pipeline straight from the research world into practice.
It's one of those things that like somebody in who knows more about this is going to tell me I'm wrong on this probably, but it feels like one of those things that like. You remember reading science fiction stories where the people stopped understanding how the computer programming works because they started having the computers program themselves?
Yes.
It feels like the first step on that path.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I know it's not, but like it feels like it is, because we get these weird algorithms that do what we want. We don't really understand exactly how they work.
Right.
Okay, so 3070 has 5,888 CUDA cores, 8 gigabytes of normal GDDR6 RAM. The 3080 has 8,700 CUDA cores with 10 gigabytes of GDDR6X RAM, which is new. And the 3090 has 10,496 CUDA cores and 24 gigs of GDDR6X RAM.
So that's actually the biggest bump on the 3090 is the amount of RAM, which is way more than double the 3080. But like the CUDA cores, the difference in CUDA cores is not gigantic.
Well, it's a 25% increase, which is substantial.
It's not nothing.
It's almost 25%.
It's not nothing. But again, like I said, when you're talking about a card that costs more than double what the other card does.
Yeah, I mean, the benefit is the RAM. They were talking about having multiple like giant ML workloads running at the same time and stuff like that. The secret of a lot of the machine learning stuff is that if it runs out of memory, it goes infinitely slower, is my understanding. But I don't know about that. So all these chips are on Samsung's 8 nanometer process, and the GDDR6X is interesting because I think they're doing more memory ops per clock cycle with that than with typical GDDR6.
That's specifically on the X variant.
On the X variant okay. And it seems like from what I can't remember if it was Tony Tomasi in the deep dive or Jen Sun in the main thing. It seems like we're maybe reaching a point where we're going to see diminishing returns on memory bandwidth, which is going to have some interesting complications.
Okay. You have written here 4 signal levels per cycle in each cell versus 2 in the previous type. Like,
so that means
surely that's not the like literal electrical signal.
That's the literal electrical signal. And they're doing like weird sampling stuff on this so that they get accurate results. It seems like there's some real weird logic. I was going to
say like on and off are very discrete states that you can read with pretty high confidence, right? But if you start getting into weird variations of on, that seems, I mean, obviously they've made it work, but that sounds magical and risky to me.
I don't understand how that stuff works, Brad. Okay. It's magic.
All right. I think risky. There are going to be several examples of that throughout this stuff.
Yeah. Like the danger of going to these editors' days is that you can generate 10 pages of notes in 6 hours and then immediately go back and turn each page of those notes into another 10 or 20 pages of notes if you start doing a lot of reading.
Yes.
So the big performance per watt stuff, the interesting data here is they're saying, and always these are NVIDIA provided numbers, so skepticism, but also the people have the cards now and can do the benchmarks themselves. So you find out pretty quickly if they're cooking numbers. It's a 1.9x performance per watt improvement under RT workload. So that means if you are playing a game like Control, you're going to see 2 times the performance for each watt of energy consumed by the card, which means what this means is you'll get a playable frame rate without having to have the blower going full speed at the resolutions most people play games at 1080p, 1440, and probably even 4K.
Yeah. I was surprised in the graph they showed that it seems like Turing, the previous architecture, more or less plateaus at about 240 watts according to their graph.
I think that's right. Yeah.
That essentially that was the ceiling on that hardware, and I assume that's due to all those inefficiencies in the pipeline that they've optimized to some degree.
Also, probably cooler design. Like there's the you're limited by what. And on a lot of this stuff, you have to decide how hot you want the card to run, how much heat you want to generate, because that's going to determine the lifespan of the card.
Right.
But yeah, and what the cooler can actually blow out. And the 28, having used it for a while, the 2080 cooler just sucks.
Okay.
It's not great.
I've never used one, but that's good to know. So I mean, but the upshot for the lay person is that you could not keep pumping more energy into the 2080 series cards and get better performance. Like you hit a pretty low ceiling on that, whereas these cards continue to scale with more power, more electricity being pumped into them, significantly higher than the old ones did.
Yeah, but my actually, when I think about it more, the Turing cards probably they're capping out because there's some bottleneck that you can't clock past.
That's what I meant.
Like you can't pump more speed doesn't make it faster at that point.
Like not to get too much into the math, but when they were talking about, the bottlenecks and how they cast and sample rays for all the ray tracing operations, they were talking about, from what I got from it, sounded like they were doing a lot of that in kind of a linear or sequential way that was not very efficient. And now they have shunted all of that off to the side so that it happens.
Well, it can happen independent of the shader pipeline, which is the key thing.
More in parallel. And like those are the types of bottlenecks that you wouldn't be able to just brute force your way past, right?
That's exactly it. And that the idea of decoupling a lot of the different parts of the pipeline is an interesting. I wouldn't have thought traditionally you think about the graphics pipeline of being like triangle setup, which is where it makes the mesh that gets rendered, and then it applies some textures and there's a lighting pass and all of that stuff. And with the way this is working, is I wouldn't have thought it's possible, but they said they were able to figure it out. It's funny when you get down into this stuff. There's also a lot of weird temporal, like you've heard about temporal AA, which basically looks at frames ahead and behind of your device and smooths based on what's coming, not necessarily what's on the screen at any given moment. And I feel like they're doing a lot of that stuff for some of these features like motion blur and stuff now too.
Yes.
So when you say it scales better with TDP, the upshot is, well, they designed a new cooler, which you probably have already seen. I'm incredibly curious to see how this thing performs. They're saying at Ampere is running at 78 Celsius at 30 decibels for the cooler.
Is that at a given performance point? Or
well, that's when it hits 78C for the card, that's the temperature, that's the loudness of the fan.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of you because they also have Turing comparisons here.
Yeah, so Turing was running at 3 degrees warmer. Was running. This is for the same performance profile. So this is like
that's how I was trying to figure out what the axis was here.
This is essentially a half power ampere equivalent to a full speed Turing, and the Turing is 32 decibels at 81C at the same power input basically.
Yeah. So significantly quieter and cooler for the same level of performance.
It also opens the door, I think, for water cooling and overclocking, all sorts of crazy stuff, which is interesting. Although, because the board design is so dramatically different than it has been in the past, my guess is that the hardware for water cooling will lag a little bit necessarily, but I don't know for sure. Okay. I feel like we talked about the RT cores. We probably talked about the tensor cores enough to maybe move on. Do we feel like
probably? Let me see. I'm looking for we have our condensed show notes that I'm looking at, and then I'm going back and looking at our raw notes that we just wrote in the presentation. It's all over the place. I'm just going to read from the tensor cores section of the raw notes. Bullet point 1, this part is magic. Bullet point 2, sparse deep learning. Bullet point 3, start with full weights, train it to make a dense matrix, and then they prune out the least important weights, then retrain it to remove the dependency on those steps. Next bullet point, still accurate but less intense. Next, I don't understand this.
Yeah, that's about right. That seems exactly right.
The last bullet point in this giant list on the tensor cores is just, I think.
Yeah.
It's a lot. Yeah. It's a lot.
So shader cores, there's a shitload of them now. They can run, like I said, independently of the ray tracing cores now. I think it used to be that they ran some of the math for the ray tracing setup on the shader cores, and that seems like it's not the case anymore. I think we should just And then the other thing that they added. Okay, so we have options. I'm going to choose your own adventure. This, Brad. Do you want to talk about cooler and board design? Do you want to talk about the I/O stuff, the direct storage stuff? Do we want to talk about reflex? So
we save the reflex stuff for a little later.
Okay.
Have we gotten through all we talked about the ray tracing and the shader stuff? The tensor,
I think so.
The main stuff with the tensor, I mean, there's more acceleration around like DLSS and stuff like that. I'm not sure where that should fit in here.
Well, there's a DLSS section down below.
Okay.
Another thing on the ray tracing. If you have a 2000 series card and you've played like Control and you remember sitting there watching the shadows and the lights be kind of speckledy, like there's almost like Gaussian noise on them.
Yes, I've seen videos breaking down those artifacts.
So now the denoising on that, on the stuff that the RT cores produce will be better because the memory speed is way faster, the cache speed is way faster on this with the GDDR6X, and the shaders can run concurrently with the RT cores now, which they couldn't do on Turing. Apparently, I didn't know that. But
so basically, it's going to clean up the output of that stuff and make it look more natural.
My guess is it's still going to be a little bit noisy, but it'll be an improvement over the 2000 series.
Yeah, and that's the type of thing that's just going to slowly go away over the course of generations, right? As they are able to sample more, cast more rays and so forth.
Yeah, that stuff happens because they're casting a relatively, like if you're making an animated movie, like a Pixar movie using the same kind of ray tracing, they would cast millions of rays. And on this, they're casting thousands of rays probably.
And just kind of interpolating the results in between.
Well, so that's exactly it. They're casting a whole boatload of rays, and then they're using like AA upscaling to fill in the holes between the rays that landed. And that produces a lot of noise right now. But
to be clear, because casting enough rays to get an accurate result would be prohibitive computationally, is what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
That's too much for the hardware to handle. Right? They're kind of fudging it. They're doing a low precision operation and then sort of fudging.
It's funny because one of the things, like in the old days when you pre-baked lighting, like in Quake or I guess Unreal pre-bakes, old Unreal doesn't, but new anyway. So we fudged the lighting because it was too computationally expensive to do dynamic lights. Then we started adding some dynamic lights, and we started doing light probes and stuff like that. But now we can do the ray traced lighting, the real lighting, the true lighting. But we have to fudge that because we can't do it we can't do enough of it. So we're fudging the results of that rather than fudging the results of the like. It's like one layer less abstract now, I guess.
Just a little less fudge than before.
Yeah. So one of the other interesting things that came out as a result of all this is that the workflow and the performance limits are dramatically different. Like on a pre-baked, on a dynamic lighting scene using more traditional rendering methods, like the number of light sources is a real gate, and it is still here. The complexity of the math goes up exponentially every time you add another light. But the interesting thing is that like the poly density of the scene when it's ray traced doesn't impact performance as much. And that I didn't really understand because it's all like you're just looking at surfaces. So whether there's infinite surfaces or a relatively small number of surfaces, it doesn't change the fact that the performance is gated by the number of lights in the scene with ray traced graphics.
It's a lot.
It is a lot.
I guess the upshot, like, I don't know how much we're getting lost in the weeds here and how much people care about all this stuff. But like, again, I just want to reiterate, like, when they come out and say like, this one is 2 times faster than the last one, like that sounds a bit bold, Like that sounds like kind of a grandiose marketing driven sort of claim. Yeah. But seeing all this stuff behind the scenes really did give context to that stuff in a way that made it easy to believe that they are seeing numbers. Obviously those are in ideal cases. Like it's not going to be like that across the board, but they at least backed up their claims in the initial stream.
We'll know when the benchmarks come out. Like when there will be independent people running benchmarks in days or weeks before the cards are available.
Yeah, but at least for me, coming from the games press, where they like companies tend to shy away from technical stuff as much as possible and make everything digestible.
How was this day for you compared to like, hey, we want you to come and play the new Gears game?
Well, like I said, this was a very eye-opening look into how intensely technical this stuff can get. I was shocked to see this level of detail exposed to the press, but obviously, like, there are a lot of tech sites out there for whom this is their bread and butter, right?
Yeah, but well, I mean, I guess, yeah, like when you go to a games thing, when I've been to games things before, it's not like you get 12 hours on how Borderlands 3 works and then they send you home with a copy of the game to try it out, I guess.
Right. Yes. Well, whatever. It's media criticism versus sort of,
right.
Technical writing.
Like technical writing. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, Reflex is this new thing that they're rolling out. They said that basically over the last couple of years, they've been looking at the impact of latency on performance, specifically they started with esports people, but they've been looking at more normal human beings now. And latency in this case means the time between when you click the mouse and when the thing that you wanted to happen by clicking the mouse happens on screen. Typically it's what a lot of people call input lag.
Yeah.
I feel like they kind of didn't like that idea.
Yeah, they are actively campaigning against the use of the phrase input lag. They seem to want to move to something that they refer to as system latency, which is kind of the whole stack of latency from physically making, clicking a button, creating input to through the graphics pipeline to X, Y, and Z until it is reflected on. There's a lot more steps in there, is what they're saying.
There's like the mouse, there's the PC, USB bus, CPU, memory, all of that stuff, the stuff that's happening and what the game is doing.
Yeah.
And then there's the render queue out through the graphics pipeline and onto the monitor. So each of those things can add latency.
Yes. And that might come off as overly pedantic, but I think the point they're making is like, hey, there are a lot of different phases in this process and we can optimize different phases in different ways to try to minimize the whole thing.
And also, this is the other thing that I was surprised by is that so they said typical latency, system latency is around 38 milliseconds. Before they started working on this stuff, they're finding that 20 to 25 milliseconds is like what a pro gamer, somebody who's relatively young, can handle in terms of physiological reaction time. And that, I'm sorry, average system latency was 55 milliseconds.
Okay. So higher than even the average person's reaction time.
Higher than the average person's reaction time. The thing that so this helps with what's called peaker's advantage. And this is something I was aware of, but hadn't really thought about and hadn't thought about a good way to metaphorize before. But I think it's easier. The idea is peaker's advantage means that if somebody's watching a corner and you peek the corner, you have the time, you'll know what's on the other side of that corner before the person who's the peeker will see the person who's camping the corner before the person camping the corner can get the signal that the person has peaked.
Yes.
And it's a necessary function of the physics of the time, the time, the 38 milliseconds or 55 milliseconds it takes the computer to render all that stuff after it gets the signal is that thing. And the important thing to note about latency is that increasing frame rate does not necessarily decrease latency depending on how you increase your frame rate. So like you see CSGO and Overwatch and Valorant and people who are playing those really low system impact, really high frame rate games at 500 frames a second, 1,000 frames a second. And it may not necessarily be helping them reduce the latency, which is the time between the mouse click and the action taking place on screen.
Was this phenomenon being reflected when I played Trials of the Nine with a hardcore Destiny crew? And every time they would go around corners, they would fire around the corner as they were looking.
Yeah, the pre-fire. Yeah, so that's the pre-fire is how you
pre-firing corners before they even knew if somebody was there or not.
Pre-firing is how you counter peaker's advantage. Now, peaker's advantage is independent of lag too, of network lag.
Okay,
so those are two different things, and like I feel like peaker's advantage probably is usually superseded by network lag on games that you're playing on the internet, but probably not if you're at like a competitive tournament or something like that on a LAN where there's lower latency, or if you're playing you have to have an incredibly low ping. So the upshot of the Reflex stuff is that they're able to get the latency down a significant amount, like to 12 milliseconds in some cases. Previously, the way you measured this was by setting up a high-speed camera in front of a monitor and wiring a mouse, wiring the mouse switch into a trigger for the high-speed camera so that you can see when all this stuff happens and you literally just count frames. It's a setup that nobody can replicate at home. Those cameras start at like 10 or 15 grand. And it was time consuming and expensive. They've built hardware into the high end, what seems like the new high end G-Sync monitors. If they say they have reflex support, they have a piece of hardware in there that you plug the mouse into a special USB port.
Yeah, it has to be the specific marked USB port. I thought that was amusing.
Well, and then you use the on-screen display on the monitor to show where the crosshair, like where the shooty spot is on your monitor. Huh. And you hit the reflex button and you fire the mouse. The monitor detects when the pixels change on the screen in the designated area, and then you get a thing that pops up in GeForce Experience that says, "Hey, here's what if you have a supported mouse."
I was going to say, like, we have to be clear. It's not only do you need a supported monitor, but also a supported mouse.
Well, so you can get the total soup to nuts latency without the supported mouse, but if you have a supported mouse, it'll break out your mouse latency too.
Okay, that's just for extra data.
Yeah, that's extra data.
Extra profiling.
So the upshot is you can find out that your mouse takes 4 milliseconds, and there's 5 milliseconds of CPU latency, and then the video card and the monitor handle 9 milliseconds, and you get a 17 millisecond total or whatever those numbers. I just picking arbitrary numbers there. I apologize. I think this is really neat. I'm really, really curious to see. Like they said, I specifically asked if this impacts normal human beings as well as like shrouds and liquids and all those like AIM monsters. And they said that they've seen more impact on casual gamers because a lot of what the pros do is train themselves to like ameliorate things like Peaker's advantage by pre-firing and latency compensation by like just knowing how to aim better.
Right.
So they're developing muscle memory to counteract these things, whereas you or I would probably be reacting to what we see on the screen.
Right. This seems a reduced version of this seems good for the average consumer in terms of the hardware demands. Like how many people, obviously there are going to be people in the consumer space that always want the best of the best and will go out and get the supported mouse and the supported monitor and et cetera, et cetera. But like, it's a tall ask for the average person to buy all these peripherals that specifically support this feature to get all this stuff.
Of course. But I mean, if it comes in just your G-Sync monitor, then you're good to go.
Yes, if they start building it into your average monitor and you're not having to buy an $800 monitor just to get it.
So the other thing that's nice is that all of this stuff is going to like this applies not just to Ampere cards, but to pretty much everything that they said was currently in the market, like that people are using right now.
So you're saying like if you get the monitor and the mouse, it'll work with your 2080.
Well, not only that, but like the reflex stuff that reduces the latency without having them. Like you can get the benefit of the latency reduction on any card on whatever monitor you're using.
Okay,
it may have to be G-Sync monitors. I didn't ask the follow up there, but
I think you and I both had the same thought during this part of the presentation, which was that it almost seems surprising that there isn't a USB port on the graphics card at this point.
There was on the Ampere cards, on the Turing cards.
Was there?
Like my 2080 has a USB-C port.
Huh. Well, but is that not for that's for display out, isn't it?
Well, it's for display out and for VR headsets, but it's basically just a normal ass video.
Oh, so
like it's a normal. You can plug your mouse into it if you want to.
That's one of those things where USB being a physical connector is just a black box for all the things it might be able to do. Like,
it's weird.
I always think of it as like, oh, well, if it's on a video card, it's probably just a video output. But in fact, it could probably do everything a USB-C port can do, which is functionally infinite.
Yeah.
That's confusing. But yeah, like it does make me, and we'll get to this more with the IO, the storage stuff that they're doing, which I'm probably going to get to next. But it really starts making me feel like the graphics card is more and more becoming the heart of the PC.
Well, if you play games, think about how often you upgrade your CPU versus how often you upgrade your video card.
Oh, sure.
Right. Yeah. And like in that, if you're thinking about which is more important, I've upgraded my graphics card probably 2 or 3 times for every CPU upgrade I've done for the last 20 years.
That's been true for quite some time. But I'm talking about more the number of functions that are being moved onto the graphics card.
Well, yeah, the thing that's happened since DirectX 3 is that anything a massively parallel computing device can do better than a serial computing device, which even like an 8-core, if you have an 8-core CPU with 16 threads, you can do 16 things at once, theoretically, right? The GPU has 10,000 shader cores.
Sure.
So it can do it can't do 10,000 super complicated things at once. But if you can break down 10,000 complicated problems into 100,000 really small steps, it can do those really, really fast, like insanely fast.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a massive amount of compute power just sitting there waiting to be utilized for things other than graphics, right?
Yeah.
But still, it's just a weird evolution of the form or the anatomy of a PC, right? That we're sitting here talking about potentially plugging your mouse straight into your graphics card at some point in the future.
So I was, when they said you had to plug the mouse into the monitor, I was like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. But like, I wouldn't have been surprised if it won't surprise me too much if at some point in the future we're plugging like SSDs into your if the video card has an NVMe slot on it for reasons that we'll get to in just a minute.
Yes.
This is a weird, so the next thing is the IO improvements. They talked about this a little bit in the big brief, but they really got into it on Thursday.
Yeah, and the demonstrations or the breakdowns they gave here were super helpful for visualizing why this matters, what it does, and why it matters.
Yeah. So the upshot is right now when you install a game and you run it and you're copying stuff over, you're copying all the textures and the assets that make up the game from your SSD or, God forbid, your hard drive
at runtime. To be clear, you're not talking about it when you install the game.
I'm not talking about downloading from Steam.
This is loading the game when you're playing it.
Yeah. So when you do that, it comes in and it goes from the SSD across the PCIe bus to the CPU into system memory where some math happens and it gets decompressed. And then these huge decompressed assets go back through the CPU onto the PCI Express bus into the GPU and into GPU memory.
Yeah. It's a very winding process for that data to go from the compressed install to the graphics card where it needs to be.
Yeah. And also there's a lot of bottlenecks, and maybe if you're doing, say, hundreds of thousands of really small IO operations, the CPU, because it can only do 8 or 16 at a time, is slow for that.
Right.
What this is, there's an API called DirectStorage that's a part of DX12 is coming out next year. Lets you bypass it. I feel like this was probably built for the Xbox Series X.
Yes, I don't. I think it might be the exact same middleware. I think it's the same.
It is the same API. Yeah, they said it's the same API, but I feel like this was built to solve a problem with. So the consoles are a little bit different since they use a unified memory bus.
Yes.
So there's system memory and GPU memory are the same memory on the Xbox and the PS5.
Yeah, that's been true since I think the 360.
Definitely the 360. I don't know how it worked on the PS3. I can't remember, but yeah, the APU, all of the APU based consoles have had shared memory pools.
PS3 was weird. I know you probably don't care, but the PS3 was split down the middle. I think it was.
Oh, that's right.
512 meg, half for the GPU, which I think was added to that system as an afterthought, and the other half for system memory.
I believe that was added at the request of Tim Sweeney, who is the only person in the world who has the hoist to get Nvidia or Sony or Microsoft to add hardware.
Whereas I think it was flexible on the Xbox. You could kind of define how much was not that. I mean, we're kind of going to get off on a tangent here, but I was always under the impression that was a unilateral advantage for consoles to just have one giant pool of memory that they could kind of use flexibly however they want. But there was, I forget, it was a Tomasi.
It's Tony. Tony Tomasi talked about this.
Who gave the breakdown that system memory and graphics memory have different priorities. What is it? It's latency. System memory, latency is the thing you want to optimize for, and graphics memory, it's throughput. Is that right? I don't know if we wrote that stuff down or not.
I think that's right. I think they're talking about raw because in graphics traditionally the speed of system memory depended on how fast GPU memory was directly tied to how fast you could render if you're doing raster based rendering.
Yeah.
So non-ray traced old school, shaded textures being lit by texture maps and stuff like that.
But this was in response to somebody in the audience asked a question because they were talking about the new memory on these cards. They were like, if this memory is so great, why don't PCs just use it for everything? Why aren't you also putting DIMMs of this stuff into your motherboard? And
that's it.
I don't know if that ties into the DirectStorage stuff so much, where assets are going through the system memory before they go back to the graphics card. I guess it would, right? I'm sorry, I know we're getting way pretty far afield of the DirectStorage stuff here. I don't know. What I was saying is I don't know if that dichotomy is relevant here, where like the problem is that all these assets are being shunted through system memory before they get to the graphics memory where they actually belong. And if that memory is not optimized for throughput, like he was saying.
Well, it is optimized for throughput, but in a much less. It's much more. They care much more about latency. That's what like the goal of system memory is to keep the CPU fed at any given moment,
right?
And the goal of graphics memory is to get shit in and out as fast as possible because they're doing whatever they're doing 150 times a second.
Right. Sorry, I know I'm just kind of rambling here, but
you're good.
I find this stuff fascinating, even if I'm not laying it out in the clearest fashion.
I was trying to find the Tony's quote. I thought I'd saved it, but I didn't, about the GPU and the shared memory pool on the consoles. And I don't think I saved it. I did not. Anyway, yeah. So this is the neat thing about this is, where we went from SSD to PCI Express to CPU to system memory to decompressing to CPU to PCI Express to GPU memory.
Now, it's a long process.
I mean, look, it still happens millions of times a second, but yeah. Now the games, if they support the DirectStorage API, can load assets straight from the SSD to PCI Express, across PCI Express to the GPU, bypassing the CPU entirely.
Yes.
And this is important because NVMe SSDs are optimized for tons and tons and tons, tens of thousands of sequential reads and writes.
Yeah, they are massively parallel, right?
Yeah, in a way that SATA SSDs and especially hard drives were absolutely not. So theoretically, if you have a game that uses DirectStorage and can write directly to the GPU memory or read directly to GPU and GPU memory, you should be able to saturate this is going to move the bottleneck from the CPU
to the storage device,
the storage bus,
right?
to the actual capacity of your storage.
Like you're basically able to process and load the data as fast as you can read it off that fast ass drive, as opposed to it hitting this super small bottleneck on the CPU.
Yeah, the downside of this is that games do have to support the new API to see the benefit, and since the API is not out yet, it's probably going to be a while before we see it in games.
Yeah. So another good question I thought that came out of the audience during this section was somebody asked, since most games are GPU bound, why would you want to move more of this work onto the GPU instead of just letting the CPU continue to handle it? Because theoretically, the CPU is sitting there with some amount of idle time. Their answer was basically like, we think it's good to give developers a choice to use this. They obviously don't have to. And for some games, it may not make sense to actually use this. They might want to stick with the old way of doing things, but it is an option for games where it does make sense.
The thing that I took away from this is, well, there's two things. One is that games that previously would have had discrete level loads, if you can rely on this technology being prevalent, which in the PC is going to be a long time before you can, then you may be able to do things like streaming level loads and have games be more open rather than having to do the run through the S curve and have a load in between their Half-Life style like we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah. This was did you watch that Mark Cerny presentation on the PS5 months ago?
Yeah.
Like this is the exact same thing he was talking about in the PS5. Like this was another nice illustration of why this stuff matters and how they're accomplishing it. Same situation there of they have dedicated hardware to handle this IO and the decompression of assets. And this is kind of the same thing. It's on the GPU in this case.
And the interesting thing, I wonder if on the PS5 they're putting this hardware, they're implementing this API on the storage side rather than on the GPU side.
It's possible.
So one of the other things that they talked about in this part that I thought was fascinating is they were loading this up on Threadrippers, which had 48 threads available.
Yeah, and
like even then, the GPU was just romping the 48 core Threadripper.
So I've got
in terms of level loads.
So I saved that slide here. So I've got those numbers.
Oh yeah, let's have them.
Let me try to summarize here because they didn't expose some of the numbers you actually want. And I need to dig for that. But basically, uncompressed assets loading off. This was for their what do they call this tech demo? The marbles
thing.
The one that they showed. I want to get my hands on one of these cards, and B, I really hope they put out that tech demo because I really want to play with that thing. That's like
they usually
probably
do.
The nicest looking tech demo I've ever seen. But
it was pretty good.
So loading that demo in, or loading assets from that marbles tech demo, uncompressed off of a hard drive took over a minute, 62 seconds. Off of an NVMe PCIe SSD, but with CPU decompression, which is the old way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
5.25 seconds.
pretty good improvement.
Off of that same NVMe drive, but with using the new GPU decompression for the assets, it was 1.62 seconds.
And that was on the 32. That was on the 24 core Threadripper. So
yes.
48 threads.
So yes, that is a 20. Yes. Did you say 24 cores?
24 cores, 48 threads.
So yeah, a 24 core Threadripper, which is a CPU that not most people have in a gaming machine, still could only do that in over 5 seconds, where it only took a second and a half with this GPU.
I wrote a note at this point because this is the moment at which they would usually, if they weren't really confident in this technology, they would do the demo on like a 6600K or something, like a 8-year-old quad core.
Yeah.
And the fact that the new 24 core got swamped is very telling.
Yes, this was not. Here's how it stacks up against the CPU most people have from 5 years ago. It's here's how this stacks up against the top of the line CPU on the market.
So
I wrote. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was. Well, you go ahead. I just was going to summarize something.
I just wrote in here. What the last note in this section is: shit is about to get really bad for PC gamers who don't have SSDs yet.
Yeah. I don't. That is maybe the biggest open question to me of how games are going to go moving on into this new console generation, where the games on those consoles are being designed around having this as a baseline.
Like, can you port Ratchet and Clank warping from world to world through those portals to PC? Yeah. I maybe, but is the market going to be big enough to support that game? Probably not.
I mean, that's a hypothetical example because there's no guarantee that game will come to PC. Even with Sony now porting some of their first party games, that one may well never come over, but there are going to be a ton of third-party games that absolutely will get ported. Yeah. And how those get ported and who gets shut out based on what kind of storage device they have is going to be a strange situation.
One of the questions I have for people who are making games is how I haven't looked at the developer docs for this API specifically, but that is how, if you choose to build a direct storage game, how do you, is there a graceful fall over for people who don't have the hardware that supports direct storage?
Right.
And also, something nobody asked and I didn't think to ask on the day is this an Ampere feature, or is this going to come to the whole Nvidia line? Like, is this something that they can back port over to the older cards?
In every other example where that was the case, they came out and said it explicitly. So I would assume they would have done the same here if that was true.
That's true.
And this also, to me, and I'm just guessing, but this sounds like something that relies on specific hardware in this card.
This seems like general math stuff you could run on Tensor shader cores.
You might be right.
Anyway,
but as far as the game design stuff, I mean, I don't know how much you want to dwell on this, but like it really goes to the fundamental question of game design and how much you want to rely on specific hardware features. Because, like, again, in that Cerny talk, he was talking about their IO stack being fast enough to load assets faster than you can spin the camera around in a scene in a game.
Yeah.
So that you literally can be loading more assets as you look around in a room. Well, but like that is a feature that you absolutely cannot have in a game that has to run off of a hard drive or even a SATA 3 SSD. So like the most inclusive strategy, but also like in a way the kind of, I don't know if sad is the right word I want to use, but you'd be leaving a lot on the table if a lot of third parties opt to just not design games around having that kind of feature because they need to come to slower devices.
So, I mean, the one thing that will happen is that these consoles will last somewhere between 5 and 10 years, right? Yeah. Like the last couple of generations have both gone at least seven.
About 7. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you assume that the clock on that is starting now, by the time we get to the Horizon Zero Dawns of this generation,
they'll be pretty widespread.
There'll be enough of a PC market to support this.
You're right. The prices on that stuff are falling so fast. Like I saw that like a 512 gig NVMe PCIe 3 drive now. Like I saw one on sale at Western Digital for like $65 the other day.
You can get.
I paid over $200 for one of those 2 years ago. So
the 2 terabyte decent NVMe SSDs are now priced about what the 1 terabyte drives were this time last year.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think those the low end ones are not quite in the same ballpark of throughput as the console ones, but they're getting into that territory.
I mean, there's time, right?
Yeah, you're right. So like by the time these games are prolific, maybe this will be kind of a solved problem in the PC space because that will be just commodity hardware at that point.
I mean, I do think in the short term, we're going to see, especially people who are focused on third party, unless there's an easy fallback that doesn't require you redesigning the actual like levels and assets in the game, we'll see probably people are opting for the least common denominator, which will be not using this stuff on third party titles.
Yeah.
Or forking it's entirely, maybe I'm nuts. Maybe people will fork the assets and just build two versions of the transition areas for
not unheard of.
Xbox and PS5 and PC.
That was absolutely not unheard of back in like the PS2 original Xbox GameCube days of games basically being the same across generations or across platforms, except for
like the level loads and stuff
designed around specific limitations here and there.
It adds a lot of time to the development and testing and stuff, which is a bummer.
That is a ton more work for the developer, obviously. On the flip side, the other thing I wanted to say about this is I have seen, I don't know about you, I don't know how much you read like gaming message boards and stuff, but there has been so much skepticism around the SSDs in the new consoles.
Really?
And how much of an impact they're actually going to make. And I think that is very much coming from, that transition where we were all on SATA 3 hard drives.
Yeah.
And, the first SATA 3, or were we on SATA 2 when the first SSDs were coming out? I can't remember.
We were on SATA 2, yeah.
Right. So it's been a lot of years.
It's been 10 years.
Right. But it's been a lot of years of SSDs being shoved onto a bus that was not really appropriate for the medium, right?
Well, the thing that happened is that the first SSDs were so, regardless of bus speed, were so much faster than this is like the latency versus frame rate thing again. The first SSDs seek times were so fast compared to traditional hard drives that they felt infinitely faster. So there was a huge performance bump when you got your first SSD in a computer. And then the performance bump from SSD 1 to SSD 2 probably didn't feel like anything.
Right.
You didn't notice.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, is that the floor for how much loading times in games could fall on SSDs has been kind of artificially high for a while.
Yeah.
And I've done a little bit of testing on SSD load times with games in the last couple of years. And like, you see situations where it's like, okay, it's like 7 or 8 seconds to load this instead of 15 from one generation of SSD to the next, something like that, And I think a lot of people look at that and think like, yes, SSDs are faster, but they're not like instant loading fast, because they're looking at this kind of old model where the devices were constrained and the games also were constrained, right? Like things have not been built around this like radically different way of loading assets.
Well, and on the PC, I want to say Red Dead was the first thing I saw that had like, you should have an SSD to play this game.
Yeah. Even stuff like WoW Shadowlands, the new expansion, they list SSD under their minimum requirements for that expansion. I don't know if that literally means you have to run off an SSD or not, but you have to remember all of the current gen consoles have hard drives. Oh yeah.
Right. So like anything that was designed to ship on PS4 and Xbox One is designed to run off of a spinning platter with a relatively small number of sequential reads.
Right. Yeah. All I'm getting at is that there is a lot of this existing skepticism that these new SSDs are going to actually matter more than the old SSDs have for the last 5 to 7 years. And seeing this broken down in a technical way, and also seeing that Marbles demo and the times there, a second and a half for a load that takes. Even compressed, uncompressed over a minute on a hard drive with compressed assets, still like 35 seconds or something.
Well, and the fun thing about using compressed assets is it increases your actual throughput, because the video card sees the compressed assets as full size. So if you're transferring an asset that's compressed 2 times or 4 times, then you're literally seeing 4x the actual throughput of the PCI Express bus if you're saturating the PCI Express. Anyway,
yeah, I know we're getting way into the weeds here, and not to belabor the point, but there are major optimizations here that are going to make a huge difference that people just have not had time to see in real world situations yet.
So if you're skeptical about the value of SSDs,
or specifically the next gen SSDs that run on the PCIe bus, this is something I believe. Let's put it that way. This is not bullshit marketing stuff. It's all there on paper in a technical way, is what I'm saying. Like
exactly.
The mechanics of this are well understood.
Next up, let's do DLSS, because this is cool, and I didn't really understand this stuff particularly well before. But this is DLSS is short for deep learning superscaling, which is a marketing term. But basically what it is set up to do is to take games that can't run at 4K at a playable frame rate, render them internally at a lower resolution, and then applies machine learning to fill in the data and let it run at, say, 4K 60 when it would normally run at 1440 60 or something like that.
Is it accurate to say this is just a very fancy AI driven form of anti-aliasing or upscaling?
Kind of, yeah. So like if you think about how AA works, like super sampling works by rendering the whole frame at like some resolution that's higher than what you're going to show on the screen. And then it averages a bunch of pixels. It does a rolling average of the pixels in like whatever size grid to turn like 4 pixels or 8 pixels or 16 pixels into 1 pixel to smooth out all of those jagged edges. Basically what this does is just does that, but without doing the scaling back down so that it stays at the high resolution. And you end up with they train neural nets on actual frames from games that are matched with perfect frames rendered either with super sampling or with accumulation rendering. Accumulation rendering is where they render each frame like 5 times and blend the results to get like one high quality result out of multiple passes.
So this is the part where my eyes start crossing, trying to parse all this. Where's the data set coming from that they are using to train this model? Like, where are these frames coming from? Like, this is not something you're not talking about the frames that are being rendered in real time in the game, right? Like, is this something that is happening?
I am.
Wait, okay.
So when they're training, they render the games in a controlled situation so that they can get exact duplicates of the same frame, right? So like they'll have a loop that they run the game through that's like running, say, Death Stranding is a good example, because they'll run the characters through every aspect of the game so they can see all parts of the game, right? And they'll record those playthroughs and then they'll render them back both on normal desktop hardware with the actual frames and then also on the supercomputer at really, 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 really high resolutions, up to 8K now.
Okay, let me distinguish here. So what I meant was the frames that are being generated by your game on your machine as you're playing. That is not, it's not training itself in real time as it's also out. That's what I was getting at. That's what. So the training is taking place like at Nvidia prior to this being put into practice. Okay.
This is why games have to actively support DLSS.
Right. So that was the natural conclusion, is that every game needs specific support for this because they have to do the work per game.
Yes. So you're training against the perfect frames, and then on the card, the tensor cores, the things that do all the machine learning acceleration, which normally aren't being used while you're playing most games, can run on the frame buffer, the output of the frame buffer, and scale it up using the data from this neural net that they've trained.
That's insane.
And the examples that they show always look like magic. I have seen a wide range of, wow, this is really amazing too. That's a weird artifact where like some stuff that pops up that shouldn't be there is popping up in the frame because machine learning is inherently goofy.
I was going to say that is the story of machine learning writ large, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like incredibly like amazing, almost magical effects with just the occasional like mind-boggling aberration, right? Like something.
Why is there a dog face in that stop sign? That's really weird.
It's 95% magically and insane and amazing and impressive, and like 5% like awful and completely wrong. We
have a channel in my work Slack called Nightmare Factory that's 4 places where the machine learning does bad things. Basically I've used that to play Death Stranding at 4K 60 on a 2080 Ti. It works shockingly well. It requires a lot of work on the part of the developer. They've now added support for greater than 4K resolutions. So previously that was limited to 4K at the peak. Now you can go up to 8K, which is how they had some people come in and look at 8K game. They had some people come and look at games on 8K screens. I believe they were giant OLED, like 85-inch OLEDs.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like basically the benefit of this is that you can get really good looking high image quality at resolutions that would be impossible to hit on existing hardware, maybe for the foreseeable future, by using AI machine learning to scale up the resolution of the rendered images, which just sounds goofy.
I didn't know those screens were available in a form that could be moved around and hooked up like normal. I assumed that stuff was all like still well, I guess they've been showing 8K screens at CES for a year or two now.
You can go, if you want to spend $50,000, you can buy an 8K TV right now, Brad.
Oh, I didn't know they were actually on the market.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So while we're on that, they did add infrastructure support for 8K 60 hertz gaming. These cards support HDMI 2.1, which has bandwidth to do everything on one cable. Previously, 8K screens were either 2 display ports or 4 HDMI 2.0s, I think. They also added support for AV1, the new video codecs. It's one of the first 8K codecs. There's no support for H.266 yet in these cards, but that presumably will be in next generation or maybe in a feature bump.
Yeah, that just got ratified a month or two ago.
Yeah, I don't think any of this stuff matters for normal people.
Probably not.
Yeah, I think this is like for tech demos and, weird stuff.
I had not even heard of AV1. I'm not familiar with that one.
So there've been two codecs for Blu-ray. There's an AV predecessor, and then there's HDMI.
Yes,
there's H.264 as well.
It's the successor to VP9.
Yeah,
which I know that's what YouTube uses for their 4K videos.
I don't know if they do anymore. I think they're using
or they did for a while at least.
Is VP9 the Ogg Vorbis?
I believe so.
Anyway,
I think that's right.
People are screaming at their radios right now. Yeah, I like realistically, are you going to play 8K games are you going to have an 8K monitor in the time that you're going to have this video card? Probably not.
I don't know for a fact that I'll have a 4K monitor in the time that I'm using this video card.
Well, I mean, I think the big takeaway is that with the 3090s, 4K is probably possible.
It's totally possible. It's more a matter of waiting for the monitors to catch up. Honestly, there just aren't a lot of high refresh 4K has just not been a thing really. And a lot of that has been limited by the connection types, the cable types. Well,
and by the panel speeds too.
Yes. So I might be good on 1440p for a bit.
Do you want to talk about the coolers real quick?
Yeah, that stuff seemed pretty impressive. I mean, I don't know a lot about cooler design. I mean, obviously I know put it this way. I know what a heat pipe is. I still don't know internally what a vapor chamber does.
Okay, so cooler design is that the big thing you notice when they showed the board cutout is that there's a hole, like the end of the board is a V shape to accommodate the second fan.
The PCB of this video card looks metal as fuck.
It looks really cool.
It's like a spiked V. It's almost like a Klingon weapon or something.
Yeah.
I've never seen a PCB that looks like that before. It's also incredibly dense.
It is. So
the PCB is like half the footprint of the one on the 2080 from the looks of the comparison.
Yeah, and it has more memory, and it is incredible the density. They have memory on both sides of the board.
There's no bare board space.
Well, yeah, there's
covered with capacitors and memory modules and just
I have to imagine it was a nightmare to design and get everything crammed in here. But they did the big V cutout so that they can have basically half of the board is fins and fan.
Yeah.
So there's a cooler that fits into that spot that's connected to the heat generating parts of the board, the GPU and the memory, with a vapor chamber and heat pipes. Vapor chamber and heat pipes, basically same idea. They use the magic of Boyle's law, which means that converting things from liquid to gas takes a fuckload of energy compared to raising the temperature of a liquid or a gas 1 degree Celsius. So going from if we're using water as the example, going from 100 degrees Celsius liquid state to 100 degrees Celsius. Sorry, let me do this the other way. Going from 99 degrees Celsius to 100 degrees Celsius liquid state takes 80 calories per gram of water, right?
Okay.
When you want to go from 100 degrees Celsius liquid state to 100 degrees Celsius vapor state, it takes 540 calories of energy per gram of water.
So that phase or that state change
exactly
is a huge energy sink.
So all of the cooling apparatus for modern graphics cards has relied on the ability to remove heat by converting things by basically setting up the state inside the heat pipes and the vapor chamber in such a way that something is the sweet spot for the temperature on the card and the cooler is going to be at the vapor change temperature.
I see.
So that they can juice that by changing. Anyway, doesn't matter.
Does that mean that moisture is just constantly being cycled in a way that it converts back and then can continually be changed from liquid to vapor?
Yeah. So the vapor will move to the cool end of the pipe and it'll condense and it'll roll back down into the pipe and it'll get back into the hot part. And then it's just constant convection. There's no mechanical process there usually.
Sure.
The benefit of this is you can move a boatload of heat. The blow-through fan is interesting because currently in most systems where the video card is plugged into the top PCI Express slot, you have air coming in the bottom front of a case. It's blowing up theoretically over an air cooler on the CPU or maybe through a radiator out. What this is doing is removing that video card in the middle of the system created a giant eddy for airflow where it basically stalled or maybe got sucked into the video card and then exhausted out the back. This is going to give a pass through that blows air up through the edge of the video card, away from the connectors, away from the mounting plate, over the CPU, over the memory, over the voltage regulators, all that stuff, and then out the back. I think I'm really interested to see how this works. I hope it's quiet. That's my big takeaway.
Like we said before, they claim that it is both quieter and more efficient than their old design, which you said was bad. So it probably wouldn't be hard to do better.
I mean, look, it's not bad. It dumps a shitload of heat out. It's just really loud.
It's just very loud. Yeah.
So the small board necessitated a power pin redesign. So instead of using the standard 8-pin, 2 4-pin connectors.
That's why they've gone to this new. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah. So the new connectors in the middle of the board, it's a 12-pin connector. All the boards all of the Nvidia designed reference boards have the 12-pin connector. Some of the partner boards will not. It's up to the partners whether they want to do that. Some of the partner boards don't use the full blow-through cooler. They're using their own coolers.
Yeah.
So, and of course, there would be partner boards that are like water-cooled with mounting blocks and all that stuff as well. The big thing about this generation in terms of partner boards is that the 3090, what would have been the Titan before, this is why they changed the name, I think, is that the Titan was only manufactured by Nvidia. The 3090s are manufactured by partners as well. So those $1,500 boards are available across the board, which means we'll also see some like $1,500. We'll see some of those 3090 boards that have like weird memory clocks and memory configurations and stuff like that, presumably.
That's cool.
I think this, like I'm stoked about the cooler design. It looks cool.
Yeah.
So the fan that's furthest away from the connector edges pulls air through the fins of the cooler and blows it up toward the CPU and the memory.
Yes.
The fan that's closest to the mounting edge of the card sucks air in and then blows it out the back. So there's still an exhaust component.
Yeah.
But it also is like facilitating airflow through your system.
So it's basically it's exhausting air out of two different spots on the card. The top front, and also the rear out the back of the case, which probably I would assume is better for cooling. The one thing that the one question that's raised for me is whether there's any concern around, that front fan, like you said, is exhausting right over the motherboard components and into the CPU fan.
Yeah.
Like, is there any concern around heating that air before you send it over all those other components? Like, is that going to impact CPU cooling?
I mean, the ambient inside your case is going to be hotter than ambient in your house. So yeah, there's going to be an impact, but will it matter? No,
probably not.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
And if you are concerned about that, what you should do is do a positive pressure cooling setup where you have an intake fan. Like most cases for enthusiasts now have the option of doing fans on the top above the CPU and the voltage regulators and all that stuff. Yeah. So put a 12 or 14 centimeter fan in there blowing in, and that'll give you a nice burst of cool air there, which I don't think this will be a problem. Somebody asked if the video cards with the way the vapor, because sometimes vapor chambers and heat pipes can be set up in a way that they don't work in certain orientations. It's less of a problem now because there's like wicking materials that pull the condensed liquid back up on the inside of the pipe. Sometimes they said it wasn't. They said it'll work in any orientation. So if you want to vertically mount your card either horizontally across the front of your case window or vertically up and down, you can do that. Let's see. Before we move on, the 3090 is a big chonker of a card.
Yeah, it's a 3-slot card.
3 slots. It's like 316 millimeters or something from short edge to long edge.
Yeah.
So
I actually looked up the specs on my case just out of curiosity. It does technically fit in my case, but you have to remove like all the front hard drive racks.
Oh, wow.
To make extra space for it.
It'll fit in my case without having to remove anything.
Nice.
Hint.
I've got room too. I'm just saying. The other thing I was going to say is that connector being moved back more toward the mounting bracket. I mean, it sounds like it's about halfway down the card.
The 12 pin?
Yeah.
Yeah, the 12 pin's almost above the GPU, it looks like.
Right. I'm sure that was primarily because of the shorter PCB, but it does make me wonder if that is also a concession to mounting in more cramped cases, because if you there are probably a lot of cases out there where the card itself would fit with whatever kind of drive mounting or whatever is in the front of the case. But once you add that extra horizontal space of trying to stick this big plug in there, it might no longer work. So like I've seen people complaining that they moved the power connector on the card back
from the end to
right. But it seems useful for people that have smaller cases that actually will probably give you some more clearance.
Well, so I'm trying to think. I think my 2080 Ti has the edges on the top edge of the card, like away from the edge furthest from the PCI Express connector. So it doesn't stick out the long end. It sticks out the top. But you're right. My 1080 definitely had connectors on the end.
Yes, that I still have a 1080 and it is
it was a pain in the ass.
Yes, it is. It gets a little cramped with that.
Yeah.
That's like an extra inch of space or something almost with that. Those kind of inflexible cables sticking out the side.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will be easier for more people to fit into their cases with that connector moved.
Yeah. Well, and the 3070 and the 3080 are much more reasonable size cards.
Yes. Those seem pretty standard.
So I think, let's see, the last thing is they're adding, where are we? There we go. They're adding more stuff to this. This Nvidia broadcast tool, is the successor to the RTX audio beta that they released this spring. I think they rolled that out.
They're rolling the RTX voice stuff into this broadcast app, right?
Yes, it seems like it.
This thing seems pretty cool.
I like, as somebody who streams, I think in a world where we weren't all stuck at home doing a lot of Zoom calls, this would be a novelty for people who stream. But in a world where you have Zoom calls, this sounds like magic.
Yes. And they showed on that stream some examples of the dynamic background removal stuff. And it seems like it works pretty well from what I saw.
I mean, in their very controlled situations, it worked extraordinarily well. I'm very interested to see what it looks like in people's houses with their shitty webcams and their bad lighting.
Sure.
But yeah, so it uses machine learning. They trained on people and chairs, so it removes everything but the chair and the person. It seemed to do a shockingly good job getting rid of with that gap between hair where there's some transparency where the edges of your hair are poking through, which is the hard part for green screens and all the other depth camera, vision cutouts I've seen.
My guess is for the small inset type of framing that a lot of people use for streaming, where their webcam feed is quite small in the overall frame, it's probably going to be totally fine. Mm-hmm. Even a little artifacting like that probably won't be noticeable at the size that most people are going to be using it at.
I'm really interested to see what it looks like when you put a good camera on it.
Yes. So I can't make use of this right now because I'm not on an RTX card. They actually they offered us early access to this application, but I can't try it. But I think we talked about on the last Patreon nip. We talked about we talked about all the stuff I've got coming for work. Yeah, I've got a nice high end mirrorless camera on the way. Yeah, so provided I get an RTX card in here, like I'm really fascinated how a super nice looking camera feed like that is going to play with this. It's probably worth mentioning how they actually integrate this into your streaming setup, which is the big thing I was a little concerned about here.
Yeah, you don't have to stream through GeForce Experience to make this work. That's the important thing.
And I feel like maybe a slightly shittier company might have tried to go that route of like, this is trying to capture a new market of like, hey, we can like sort of force people into our streaming pipeline by giving them these cool features. But
if you want people to use this stuff that are professionals, then you have to make it accessible to whatever tool chain they currently use.
You're right. And that's what they've done here. So maybe I was worrying for nothing, but that is how this works. It takes in your webcam feed, your microphone, like your game audio or whatever other audio sources, and it sounds like it's going to spit them out as virtual devices in Windows.
Yeah, it seemed like with there's a newer version of RTX audio coming with this as well that will let you like assign it per input. So like if you have an input for your Discord chat, then you can just do RTX audio on the Discord chat if you have a good mic, stuff like that.
Yeah. So it almost sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like this kind of works the way that Voicemeeter does, where it's creating virtual audio devices as outputs in your system, and then you can you can assign those out in different applications.
That seems right. And they said that it'll work like running compressors, like running normal audio tool chain stuff on it won't jack up the impact.
Yeah.
Let's see what he said. He said if you're like, I think he said reasonable tool chain. So I assume that means like noise gate and compression, not like reverb and stuff like that.
Yeah. I was surprised. They were fairly candid about the performance impact of this stuff, which is bigger than I expected.
Yeah,
so they mentioned like the RTX voice beta, they were looking at an 8.5% hit to your frame rate if you had it enabled. They've got that down to they've got that down to 3.6% in this release version, which is not that bad. But they say that go ahead.
I was going to say presumably that's on stuff that uses the RT cores and and stuff like that. So I would think if you're running something that's CPU limited, you'll see a smaller hit.
Maybe so.
So if you're running like 300 frames in Overwatch, you're probably fine.
Right.
But if you're running Control, you're going to see a performance hit.
It did make me think, like, if you remember back when that RTX voice beta first rolled out, there were people that like instantly, like the same day, were like, hey, you can just like hack the installer very easily and make this work on a 1080 or whatever on the Pascal cards. But seeing this performance hit made me realize, like, doing that, kind of like you were saying with running ray tracing on the shader cores in a 1080, probably was working that card pretty hard to do this stuff, right?
I would think so, yeah.
Like you were actually like pumping a fair amount of juice into your card to make this work.
My guess is that on a non-RTX card, you're probably running math on shader cores that's designed for its dedicated units on a ray tracing card.
Right.
And as a result, you're on a dual PC streaming setup, you're probably fine. On a single PC streaming setup, your game performance is probably going to take an enormous hit.
That's the point I was trying to make, is like using that on a GTX card would be prohibitive if you're also trying to crunch a game at the same time. Right. And the background removal on the webcam feed, they're saying, is at the moment is a 15% hit to your frame rate, which is not negligible.
But they also made it abundantly clear that they feel like there's a lot of room for improvement.
Yeah, they say they're going to keep working on reducing that. But as of right now, that's like, depends on the game. Like some games that wouldn't be a problem because, like you said, you're running games like Overwatch at insane frame rates already. But there are certainly games out there where I would not want to sacrifice 15% of the performance for a feature like that.
My takeaway on both of these features is that they're probably going to get RTX voice down low enough that everybody is going to want to run it.
Yeah.
If you're playing games online with friends so that they don't hear your keyboard and stuff like that. Especially if you're doing a lot of voice calls, it's worth putting on because like I can run the fan in my office and nobody hears when I'm on a Zoom call.
Yeah. And like you said, if you're not playing a game at the same time, it doesn't really matter how much it's working the graphics card.
Exactly. When my guess is that the green screen cleanup thing, you'll probably only use if you have a 2PC setup or if you have a 3090.
Sure.
If you like, my guess is that's only something that streamers who are fairly professional or pro-am and have multiple PCs doing their setup will do.
Sure. Of course, those people probably have green screens and other solutions for that stuff already.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you the green screen's not great, Brad.
No.
It's a pain in the ass.
But it's right there. I see it right behind you.
That's the problem. You can see it right behind. No, the problem with green screens is that in order for them to work well and look good and give you a clean, no bounce back result where your hair and like your skin tone doesn't pick up a little bit of the green, you either have to have a lot of distance or you have to have everybody involved lit really well. And it's hard to do that unless you have a lot of space. Like for example, when we were in the whiskey basement, we used to use the green screen down there a lot. Norm and I would stand 10 or 12 feet off of the green screen to make lighting it easier. Sure. And with this, most people's houses don't have that kind of space.
Right.
So having like the green screen is not a fantastic solution. That's all I'm going to say.
Is this the type of thing? Is this kind of keying the kind of thing where if cameras were shipping with dedicated depth sensing hardware, or you could even maybe buy an external USB depth sensor that you could pair with a camera, like that this problem could just be solved more easily that way?
As somebody who has 2 USB depth cameras connected to their 2 PCs on their desk right now, I will tell you that they probably provide valuable data, but the depth camera resolution is blobby enough that things like your hair end up with outlines around them of the real background.
That makes sense.
Probably not.
Okay. Yeah. Not there yet on that stuff. Maybe when LiDAR is out there, maybe you get a LiDAR sensor for your webcam.
We had LiDAR. That's the Kinect One. It was great. We loved that thing.
Oh, good. Okay.
I feel like you get a little bit cleaner data on the newer depth sensors that are on the iPhone. Like the newest sensor I have here is probably 2 years old, so they have progressed dramatically in that time. But right now, my feeling on depth sensors is that they're really, really good for things like collision avoidance on robots and drones, and maybe not great for fine detail work.
Okay, that makes sense.
And I think that's it.
Okay, that's a lot.
I think we're done. We've won.
That's a lot, man.
Congratulations.
You're not wrong. For as much as I was saying these cards are just sort of the performance bump to the previous cards, like around the edges, there are a ton of new features here. It's just not, there are no new graphics features on the order of RTX. Well, like that was like RTX was like that's a generational change.
That's at every 10 years. Yeah.
But with, all the DirectStorage stuff and the kind of addition of DLSS all over the place and, looking down this list, there's a lot of new stuff that you can do with these things that doesn't necessarily pertain directly to graphics.
So when I said it wasn't that, what I meant specifically is previously, like usually when you think of the TIC as a new architecture and the TOC as a revision of that new architecture.
Yes.
This is a revision of a new feature, but it is a new, like Ampere represents it's a
new microarchitecture.
New spin of the silicon. No, it's more than just a new spin of the silicon, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yes, you're right. Wait, did you actually just lay out TikTok in the sensible way? Because I'm pretty sure there were a lot of people out there claiming it was supposed to be the opposite back then. A lot of people, like I remember people saying that the TOC was supposed to be the big new change because in their minds TOC is louder than TIC. I think Intel was the proponent of that theory. That's insane to me. Look, TIC literally comes before TOC. TOC is the second of two.
I had a conversation with an Intel person when they rolled this whole thing. I was like, look, man, TIC is the first one. And I don't care if TOC is louder. Yeah. TIC is the first. And then the TOC is when you make the new thing good. And then the TIC is the new thing. And then the TOC is when you make the new thing. They've ditched that. They decided it was confusing and they got rid of it. So
it's not TOC TIC. Okay.
Yeah. Look, that would be a weird clock. I don't want a TOC TIC clock.
Wait, what if we can make time run backwards?
No, I don't want to go. No, I don't want to do the last 6 months again.
That's a good point, actually. Yeah. Be careful what I wish for.
Maybe forwards faster would be better. Anyway. Brad, I think this is our 1 year anniversary of the launch of the show.
Is it really? Like to the day? So.
Well,
we're pretty close.
I think
to the episode.
We're to the yes, the thing that you just said. Because we skipped one episode, as I recall. Okay. In this the first year.
It kind of flew by. It's wild. I don't know what did we talk about?
The months went really fast and the days were interminable.
Yeah.
But it's time to thank our patrons.
Yes, thank you for wonderful people for getting us here and keeping us going.
If you would like to find out how you can support the podcast, you can go to patreon.com/techpod. And for as little as $2 a month, you can get access to the fabulous TechPod Discord. Yes. There's a new channel. We didn't talk about it last week.
Oh?
Yeah.
Oh?
Yeah.
Hang on. I'm struggling here. Don't tell me. What is the new channel?
Wait, isn't New Ass Computers the new channel?
It's been around for a little bit. The name may have gone through a couple of permutations.
I feel pretty good about it. I like where we're at.
I don't know.
No?
I think that name may have a shelf life. I think
I think every name has a shelf life.
I think there's a better joke to be had there.
I'm totally down with a better joke.
All right.
But yeah, the TechPod Discord is full of brilliant, wonderful people who are talking about all of the things that we talk about at a much deeper detail level.
Yes, there are people on that Discord who absolutely would have sat through this presentation and fully grasped everything that was being discussed.
And there are
definitely some graphics programmers on that Discord.
Yes, that is 100% true. They are the ones that were screaming at their radio through the entirety of this episode.
Yes.
But if from stuff like the Mister and I got a ton of help with my Home Assistant setup last week. It is an unbelievable resource for learning more about how the world around you works, which is what I love. And
do you know what I saw somebody do on there?
Ooh.
I've talked about how I have my Astra mix amp mounted under my desk, and I use some of that 3M dual grip that we talked about a little while back. Somebody did it with that the nano bubble stuff.
Oh, did it stick?
Yeah, they just posted a photo that they've got the full-on mix amp stuck to the bottom of their desk, and there's no adhesive. I mean, I know there is on the backside where it's stuck to the desk, right? But isn't the actual nanobubble material?
Just suction.
It's literally just like suction or friction or whatever holding it on there, right?
Suction. Straight up.
There's no glue.
Vacuum.
Oh, that's wild. No glue. I might have to get some of that stuff.
You should. It's amazing. It's like $15 for a sheet that will last you a year if you cut it to small places.
I love to mount.
It is. Hold on, you phrasing there.
I love to mount things. Is that better?
Yeah, you nailed it. Much better.
That totally makes the difference. With this episode's long already, I shouldn't just sit here and ask questions, but
go for it.
Do you think something like that? And this is a ways off because I still have this crappy old desk that is doing what I need it to do. But one day I will have a different desk, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to mount like surge protectors and my router, unless I live the true dream and have a rack in my basement and things like the router live down there.
The basement rack.
But if not,
I looked at racks the other day.
They're expensive.
You can get a half, like one that would fit under your desk. That's not that bad.
Dude, who wants a half rack?
I kind of want a half. I don't want to have to move a full rack. They're really heavy.
If I buy a rack, I want it to be as tall as me.
Well, what?
But anyway,
yeah, okay.
For the moment, let's say I wanted to mount like my router and network switch and a couple surge protectors underneath a desk, like literally upside down.
Yeah.
Do you think something like the nano bubble would be sufficient for that, or is that asking for it?
Because the cables on the power,
too much tension.
It's too much tension on the cables. I just screwed some of those baskets into the bottom of my desk, and then I threw all that shit in there, and it's up where I can't see it unless I'm laying on the ground.
That works.
So yeah.
Okay. Good enough.
I was thinking about putting some underlights on the desk though.
Ooh,
like just downlight the desk, get a little bit of a purple.
I've got a backlight. I think we've talked about it. I've got the
backlight's good.
The LED colored LED strip on the back of my desk. I can make it orange or purple on the wall.
Ooh. The only two true colors.
Yes, those are my two favorites.
It's the time. So yeah, if you're curious about this, you want to check it out. The address again is patreon.com/techpod. As always, if you can't support the show, that's fine. We're doing great. Thanks you all for your support.
Tell your friends.
I love it. I love seeing people on Twitter sharing word of the things that go on in the Tech Pod.
Yes.
We really love that. It's been great.
Yes.
And thank you, as always, to our executive producer level patrons, Andrew Cotton, David Allen, and Jacob Chappell. Thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
And we will be back next week with more Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I think I've been fooling with Moonlight, Brad.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah. I was able to play Epic Store games on my Steam Link in the living room.
Wait. How are you running Moonlight on a Steam Link? Or are you just capturing the... Okay.
Moonlight runs on Steam Link, dude.
I didn't know that.
I can run up to like 100 megabits per second, the video stream of my wired network.
Is it better than the Steam home streaming?
It looked better. It seems a little less juddery.
Interesting. How's the latency?
I was able to land tricks in Tony Hawk.
Okay. Doesn't Moonlight use the Nvidia streaming tech?
So it uses the stuff. We should talk about this in an episode.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm teasing. This was a tease.
Oh, right. Yes. There are.
Yeah. I don't want to give it all away.
Let's say, I forgot we had talked about that. Let's say there are quite a few options for both in-home and across the internet streaming of your games. And
there's a multitude.
Maybe we'll go through all of them at some point.
Dude, we should set up that Moonlight internet node thing. I should set up that Moonlight internet node thing and see if you can connect to it.
Oh, weird.
And see see if you can play from my house.
Huh. I didn't know that existed.
Yeah.
That sounds
this sounds like an episode.
That could be useful for my day job, actually.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Couch games.
Yep.
What I want to know, here's a question for the audience before we get into this. Is there a way I can plug a USB connector from my computer into the Mister and then pipe the video output of the Mister through some magic that's going to let like you and I sit down and play, say, a 2-player SNES game running on the Mister on my desk across the internet?
Well, if you have capture hardware, you can just capture the video.
Yeah, but how do you get the input into the Mister?
Yeah, but the input is the question. I guess that would probably just have to be coded into the Mister system, like the cores, something would have to recognize that input.
I'm asking because I want the people. I bet somebody knows. I bet you can actually Parsec or something.
I'm trying to think. Parsec does have, or it can at least tie into some kind of gamepad emulation or mapping.
You might have to use like an Arduino or something as an in between. So the Arduino would show up as a game controller, and then for the Mister, but it's programmed by the PC and it's just passing signals.
We are totally just cannibalizing material here at this point. Yeah. But there is a support page, I believe, on the Parsec site that tells you how to play Xbox One games remotely. There is a way to emulate the input of the second player on an Xbox One from a PC through Parsec, and I'm not sure.
Holy cow!
How it works. But if that's happening at the D input or X input level, you might actually just be able to map that to
the Mister,
to a virtual gamepad that would work with the Mister. That's possible. You should look into that.
I will look into that. This sounds like a fascinating episode. Perhaps for next week.
Test that out and report back.
Yeah. Always a pleasure, Mr. Shoemaker.
Thank you. I know this was a dense episode. I hope it was illuminating for people, though.
I'm going to go take a nap now.
Yeah, that sounds good. It's very hot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I haven't checked the air quality today. I don't know if it's safe to open the window or not. Let's see.
We've had windows open today.
It's pushing it.
I had them open last night. It was great.
Okay, we're at a PM 2.5 of 77. What do you think?
Oh, that's fucking fantastic compared to what we've had lately. Hold on,
Wait.
let me.
Yeah, but would you leave the window open all day with that?
69, 75.
77. It's still in the yellow.
That's in the. Yeah, that's in the.
That's approaching the danger zone for me.
Yeah, like once we get into the yellows, when I turn it down.
Yeah.
Let me see what we're at. According to my Home Assistant install, we're at 61.
Oh, that's not bad. That's almost in the green.
Yeah, it's pretty good. And right now outside, it is 68. Oh, hold on. In my backyard, it is 79 degrees right now. Holy shit! It's already 79 degrees. It's only it's only 11 o'clock. What the hell?
All right.
I'm gonna go edit this before it gets 90 in here.
That's a good idea.
See y'all next week. Bye, everybody.